You know, kickers have feelings too, or at least that's what they say. So we're not going to ignore them when we're talking about fantasy football, and neither should you when you're drafting for your fantasy football team. Here with PFW fantasy expert Mike Wilkin, to talk about those lonely kickers who wait to the last round usually to get taken. I know I don't draft a kicker until the last round, and I'm happy to dump him for somebody else if he's not getting the job done. But there are some kickers out there that had some pretty nice seasons last year, looking at David Akers, Akers and Janikowski. Convince me that you should take a kicker earlier than the last round.
I think it comes down to league rules, and it comes down to whether or not you're convinced that a David Akers or a Akers and Janikowski are that much better than the other guys on the board. And I think those are the top two, and I think pretty clearly. But David Akers had a monster season for a kicker last year. Now, if you think he's going to play back to something close to that level, then, you know, he might be a guy that you go get a little bit earlier than those last couple of rounds. Janikowski, I think with the leg strength, particularly in leagues that give points for longer field goals, is someone you have to consider.
Yeah, and it's one of those positions that, again, we always forget about. You're watching the games on Sundays, you're watching your running backs and receivers and quarterbacks score touchdowns. The kicker comes on, you don't really think about it. But when David Akers is getting as many field goal opportunities as he got last year, you start to notice it, and you notice it does a lot for your fantasy team. So we talked about some of the big guys. Who are some of the sleepers? Who are some of the kickers that maybe owners might not think about it when it comes down to that pick they should take a look at?
You know, there are two late round guys that sort of interest me. Dan Carpenter in Miami, because I think he's going to get a high volume of opportunities. More than 9 points per game per PFW's numbers last year. And Jay Feely is someone that I like. I think he's consistent. I think the Arizona offense could be a little bit better this year. You know what you're going to get out of him. So those are a couple guys that jump out to me, but I think overall this is a position where you're not particularly deep in the sleeper category.
Kicker always an interesting position because, well, for one thing, it's a kicker, and people don't really care about the kickers, but also you're looking at a guy who, let's say it's a Mason Crosby for the Green Bay Packers. You know he's going to get plenty of opportunities for extra points, but is he really going to get a lot of opportunities for field goals? You mentioned David Akers. He was on a 49ers team that didn't necessarily punch the ball in the end zone very often, but they were good enough in field position that he got a lot of field goal opportunities. So you got to make that balance when you're getting these kickers. I also like a guy like Matt Bryant, who I know is going to be kicking indoors throughout most of the season, or someone on the New Orleans Saints, so you get that kind of advantage. What are some of the rules that these owners should think about when they're drafting a kicker?
Well, if you take a David Akers a little bit earlier, maybe you're patient. Maybe he's a season-long proposition for you because you've made that call that he's going to be a special player at the position. But if you wait until the last round, I don't think you can really afford to be patient at the position. If you're unhappy with what you're getting points-wise, I think you have to move on, and you have to continue to look at how to get more points out of that position. And the last thing I would mention, I think we can agree on this, don't draft two-place kickers.
Don't do that.
Unless it's required. In some leagues it's required, there's maybe an old rule or something like that, but otherwise, take one kicker, particularly if you have waivers, and just sort of make the decision to go with one guy and use that other pick that you might have used on a backup for a bye week on a quarterback, on somebody else, a skill position guy that might turn into a home run type proposition. Place kickers, you generally know what you're going to get. Just use the one spot, and again, use waivers when you need to.
Well, I think we certainly have made a record here, Mike, for the longest video ever to talk about fantasy football kickers. But they are important, and we have full rankings of all the place kickers for fantasy football at our website at ProFootballWeekly.com.